I am here to read to you a brief article I wrote regarding the current riots in America regarding the death of Mr. Floyd in Minneapolis. The lie destroying America. The reason America is literally burning today is because half of our nation has lost the ability for independent thought. A fourth grader could prove this by answering the question, do you see any racism here in this Minnesota police incident? Despite the utterly obvious absence of racism in the manslaughter of George Floyd, half the country has been so spellbound by our leftist conquered institutions, especially the mainstream media such as CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, that they are convinced to the point of rioting that there exists a racism epidemic saturating all aspects of America, including the police. This racism lie is so easily disproven by mountains of police and FBI statistical evidence, yet half the country clearly would rather burn churches, police stations, and low-income housing developments than take 30 minutes to verify their conclusions. According to the video, quote, "Are the police racist?" unquote, at YouTube channel PragerU, a police officer is 18 and a half times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is likely to be killed by a police officer. I'm going to say that again. A police officer is 18 and a half times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is likely to be killed by a police officer. Direct police and FBI statistics corroborate this. Please research yourself, please. The problem is not racism or epidemic police brutality. There have been roughly 6 million police arrests so far in 2020. We have seen one incident of manslaughter with zero evidence of racism within it. For further circumstantial evidence, the arresting officer clearly knew he was being videotaped. It is not rational to believe he intended to kill a man while being filmed. Despite such basic evidence revealing this to be no more than a tragic and indeed relatively isolated manslaughter incident, half the country has been so zombified by the duplicitous leftist media that they truly believe the correct moral action is to support Black Lives Matter, a group that proudly chants, "What do we want? Dead cops. When do we want it? Now." Let's review some of these famous Black Lives Matter cases. Michael Brown had just committed a strong-arm robbery and then punched a police officer and grasped for his gun, as DNA confirms. The saying, "hands up, don't shoot," splayed across CNN and the New Yorker and countless other media, was a 100% confirmed lie uttered by Brown's accomplice in the robbery. Trayvon Martin had been suspended from school for vandalism and was found in possession of burglary tools. In the altercation that led to Martin's death, photographs of Zimmerman show him badly beaten. Eric Garner, who gasped, "I can't breathe," was choked for a maximum of 15 seconds. He didn't die from racist police brutality. He died from complications resulting from diabetes and asthma. Now, we do have an actual case of manslaughter of Floyd, but racism didn't exist at all. I'm embarrassed to admit that briefly in 2015, I was a member of Black Lives Matter. I began compiling video examples of blacks suffering police brutality. But what woke me into reality was that, despite my agenda, I found that there were far more video instances of whites suffering police brutality than blacks. Then I investigated the complex crime statistics and discovered that despite blacks constituting 12% of the population, they commit over 50% of murders. I also discovered that blacks are 28 times more likely to assault a white than vice versa. You can look that up in The Color of Crime by Kay Russell. In other words, I discovered that blacks are arrested more than other races because they commit far more violent crime, and that police brutality evidence suggests that there exists no police brutality racism issue at all. It is this independent, unbiased investigation that half of America neglects because they are so deeply indoctrinated with a false narrative, a deeply pernicious narrative of racism. This afternoon, I stood counter-protesting the Black Lives Matter crowd at my local courthouse. The best I can say about them is that maybe 1 in 10 of them could create a cogent, if unsound, argument. Most of them would just scream with their middle fingers raised at me. A single counter-protester against hundreds. Signs said, "No justice, no peace," despite the fact that the perpetrating officer is receiving justice under law. So many signs read, "Black Lives Matter," despite the utter absence of racism in the incident. One man confronted me to say, "Black Lives Matter." I responded with, "Of course they matter. Do white lives matter?" Unresponsive, he walked away. Zombies, man. They repeatedly shouted that officers shouldn't choke people to death. Who doesn't agree with that? Officer Derek Chauvin will receive justice under law. If you are angry with the police behavior within the United States, then which country should our police force model itself after that has much more appealing police brutality statistics? What these protesters don't appreciate is that it is far exception that such police brutality occurs. But because all the media shows them is such incidents, and not the more than 14 million yearly arrests that don't involve such brutality, these protesters truly believe these incidents are common. They have been duped. It is this poisonous false narrative of epidemic racism, along with others, that has already deeply wounded our nation. If the woke half of the nation doesn't become vocal in actively combating these false narratives, such as I am, and the other half is allowed to continue their deeply harmful activism, our country is clearly doomed.